Today's lesson is 10.3, weight. Our learning target today is I can compare numbers to interpret intervals and order objects by weight. So, I've used this term weight several times already in the lesson. But what does weight mean? You're going to have a chance to talk about that. Also, a pound is a unit of weight. What are some other units of weight that you know? You're going to turn and talk about this now. Pause video. Great ideas. The definition we'll be using for weight is the force of gravity pulling an object towards Earth. Because of gravity, we're able to tell how heavy or light an object might be. If we were to go out in space, the weight of objects would change because it no longer has this force pushing down on it. So if I were to go in space, my weight would seem much lighter than it actually is because I'm no longer being pushed down by gravity. When talking about weight, there's two different categories we think about: metric units and customary units. The majority of the world uses metric units. The United States is one of the few countries that uses customary units. It is also known as U.S. customary units because of that. In the metric units, we hear terms like a metric ton, kilograms, grams, milligrams. The base unit primarily being grams. In the U.S. customary system, we have terms like ton, pounds, and ounces. To weigh something, we use scales, but different scales are used to weigh different things. Notice on this page, these are all examples of food scales, but a produce scale is going to be used very differently than the scale right here. A produce scale is going to be used to measure fruits and vegetables from the grocery store, so you can see the total weight. That's going to be used much differently than the scale here. This scale is going to be used to figure out portion sizes of food. So while it's both measuring food items, they're being used in different ways. When choosing a scale, there's several things to consider. One of these things is the capacity of the scale, or how much weight that scale can hold. If I'm looking here, this scale has a capacity of 16 ounces. That's fairly small. When I look at the balance scale, it has a capacity of 2 kilograms. That's much larger. So, if I'm going to be weighing a heavier object, I'm going to most likely choose the balance scale in comparison to that scale up there because the total capacity is much larger. Think about it when you're weighing people. An infant scale has a capacity weight of 25 pounds. So I wouldn't weigh a third grader on an infant scale because the scale wouldn't be large enough. I would need a different type of scale. When choosing a scale, I not only want to consider the capacity of that scale, but also the precision of the scale. Precision means how accurate that scale is. In this case, the smaller the unit or fraction, the more precise the scale will be. So if I'm looking at all of these different scales up here, what I may notice, the produce scale is going to have a precision of every 1 ounce, so it's going to measure every 1 ounce of an object. Now that's pretty precise, but let's say I was measuring a powder or something like that. This market scale down here is going to have a much higher level of precision. It's not only going to measure every 1 ounce, it's going to get even smaller to every 0.1 of a pound or every 5 grams. That's much more precise. Now, this comes in hand in our day-to-day lives. For example, when we go to the post office, they measure our letters, and they do this so they can decide how much they need to charge for the postage. Now, a letter is very, very light, and they want to use the most precise scale possible to figure out that measurement. Now, when choosing a scale, they probably wouldn't choose that produce scale because that 1 ounce measurement isn't going to give them a precise enough weight. So they might be more likely to choose a scale similar to a market scale, where it's going to really give them that precise measurement of the weight. While scales can be very different, they have some things in common also. Today, most scales display weights in both the metric and customary units of measure. Also, all scales can adjust to show 0 units when nothing is being weighed. Again, notice this produce scale, nothing's on it, and it's starting out at that 0 mark to show that it has no weight. It doesn't take into account the weight of the scale itself. Scales can be electronic, like this market scale. Also, scales can be used to weigh large and small objects. So again, I can find the weight of a car, but I can also find the weight of objects that can't even be seen by the human eye. Determining what scale I use to take these measurements depends on the precision of the scale. On page 246, you're going to notice some different scale types. Your job is going to be to think of some different objects that could be weighed on those scales. You can refer to page 165 and 166 to see what those different scales look like, their capacities, and their precision. Remember, you need to consider the capacity and precision of a scale when thinking about what types of objects can be measured on that scale. You will also be completing journal page 247 in your student reference book. This page requires you to take some measurements or weights off of scales. So let's practice reading scales. When reading a scale, there's 2 things we need to consider: the unit and the weight. So the unit is what we're measuring. When I look on the scale up here, I'm noticing the unit is grams. So I'm going to put a G for grams. Now, when I take the weight, I'm going to take the weight similar to how I would read a ruler or a clock. In this case, I'm going to follow that arrow all the way down, and I'm noticing, oh, it's saying it's hitting that 200 mark. So if I were to read this scale, I would say the weight is 200 grams. So remember, no matter the scale you're taking a measurement from, you need to consider the unit and the weight or that number value you're seeing. Good luck!